Welcome back to the Adventures of the Monad, which will look at life, the universe, and everything. My name is Kazim Kamal-ur-Rahim. In this series, I ask the question, where do we come from? Who are we? And where are we going? I post one presentation a week. Please subscribe to my website and hit the bell icon for notifications of future videos. You can also leave comments and join in forum discussions on my website. In presentation 21, I looked at collective consciousness from the perspective of the evolving human monad as opposed to the collective consciousness of the three lower kingdoms of nature. The human monad in the first triad is able to experience feelings, desires, and thoughts simultaneously, as all three first triad envelopes can communicate to each other. I then started to look at the levels of consciousness that are available to all monads in the six kingdoms of nature. This consciousness was split between subjective and objective consciousness. How these two forms of consciousness changed were represented in a diagram. This diagram shows the major transformation that takes place when a monad takes the third initiation and gains objective consciousness in its three lower bodies of incarnation. In the previous presentation, we also looked at consciousness development from a subjective and objective point of view. This can further be refined if a numbering system is used to help in the classification and discussion of the development of consciousness. We develop our consciousness through three triad centers at a time. Consequently, there is no clear-cut transition from physical to emotional to mental consciousness. Visually, it is possible to see how subjective consciousness precedes objective consciousness. This visual representation also allows us to see how consciousness develops slowly through the subplanes. It also reminds us that as we evolve, we clear out our envelopes of the lower vibrating secondary matter, allowing us to raise our consciousness even further. Looking at this diagram, the same concept can be represented numerically. The left-hand column lists the 5 stages of human development in the fourth kingdom. The next column reminds us where the monad has its focus of attention in the initial stages of human development. The monad locates itself in the permanent physical atom. The next 2 levels of development both occur with the monad focused in the permanent emotional atom. It then moves to the permanent mental molecule and finally to the permanent mental atom, located in the causal body in the second triad. Ranges of numbers are given for each of these stages. The absolute numerical values are of no specific interest, but only serve to give us a comparison between the levels of development. What is worth noting is that when you look at the ranges of values in the subjective column, they are 100 points higher. This reinforces the message that subjective consciousness precedes objective consciousness and is the driving force behind the evolution of the monad. Because subjective consciousness precedes objective consciousness by half a plane or 100 points, it allows us to speculate how a monad's consciousness may be affected by their behavior in an incarnation. If a person has a subjective consciousness of 360, they are at a stage of development that I have classified as community. These classifications are outlined in greater detail in due course. This does not mean that their actions, emotions, and thoughts are restricted to the range of 300 to 399. most human behavior falls about 100 points above or below the average range of consciousness. Any thoughts, emotions, or actions that fall below the monad's average level are detrimental to evolution. They can be considered as being evil. Let's remind ourselves that a monad's level of development is determined by its position in the triad chain and the contents of its causal envelope. Our persona's level of development is evident from the molecular content of our subtle bodies. Which way round is your egg pointing? If we routinely act and think below our level of development, our subtle bodies become denser and consciousness decreases. The color emanating from our subtle bodies would also change. Positive thoughts, emotions, and actions refine our causal matter. The lower causal body is therefore representative of our persona's level of consciousness in an incarnation. At the end of the incarnation, the lower causal matter is returned to the storehouse in the higher causal body, either refining it or degrading it. As only 5% of causal matter descends on average per incarnation, the overall effect on the soul's development is small. It is a safety net to stop one bad life severely hampering our development. As an example, assume a soul has a level of consciousness of about 450 before it incarnates. Its persona draws into itself elemental essences that match this level of development. If bad deeds are committed in adulthood, the level of consciousness in the persona may drop by 50 points. When the lower causal body reunites with the higher causal body, the overall level of development only drops to 430, as 95% of the causal body was at 450 points to start with. There is another possibility in extreme cases, where the soul's guardian angel may choose to write off the 5% of causal matter that went towards creating the persona, and not let it rejoin the 95%, contaminating it more seriously. It must be remembered that although causal matter may not be brought home to roost, the lower permanent atoms and molecules do carry the scars of that incarnation, and those negative traits and habits need to be expunged at some point. The salient point is not to rely on insurance policies. Don't have the train crash in the first place. As a continuation of an understanding of soul development, the diagram presented is an attempt to look at the development of the subtle bodies from a molecular perspective. The left-hand column is the same as the previous diagram. The 5 levels of soul development are presented alongside the number system to represent these stages of development. The first thing I would like you to examine is the pattern of colors in the body of the table. The darker rectangles represent envelopes that have objective consciousness. The lighter ones represent subconscious or unconscious envelopes. In the unity column, the grey rectangles indicate that no envelopes have formed at all. It is only at or near enlightenment that the monad begins to build up its next 2 envelopes, the unity and the lower spiritual. So to decode this diagram, every level of soul development has full objective consciousness on the physical plane. The physical plane here is defined as the levels 49.5 to 49.7. It is gases, liquids, and solid matter. If you look at the top row for the enlightened soul, 600 to 699, you can see that this soul is objectively conscious in all its envelopes that go to make up the body of the monad as it passes through the 4th kingdom of nature. While still in the 4th kingdom, the monad is subjectively conscious in the 3 lowest subplanes 46.5, 46.6, and 46.7. It's only when you get to the fifth kingdom, the unity plane, that the monad is conscious objectively on the three lowest subplanes of the 46th plane, 46.5 to 46.7. At soul development levels 1, 2, and 3, the monad is subjectively conscious at different levels in its etheric, emotional, and mental bodies. The precise molecular levels can be understood by examining this table more closely. This is not possible in this presentation, so I urge you to visit the website where the table is presented in the script. What the changing numbers indicate, as the previous diagram showed visually, is that as the consciousness develops, denser molecules are replaced by lighter ones. This is represented in the replacement of the lower vibrating numbers for higher ones. As an example, a compassionate soul is subjectively conscious on subplanes 48.2 to 48.5. A soul on level 2, the community level, is subjectively conscious on levels 48.4 to 48.7. So, the soul on level 4 has filtered out the lower vibrational molecules 48.6 and 48.7 from its emotional envelope. Those base emotions of fear and anger no longer trouble it. Conversely, the soul on level 2, the community level, lacks the more refined molecules at sublevels 48.3 and 48.2. Consequently, it is not able to experience the higher emotions of compassion and unconditional love. From this presentation, I also draw your attention to the fact that the souls at the lowest three levels of soul development are unconscious when they enter their causal body. This happens between incarnations. The exact mechanism for this transition is discussed in the future. When the monad evolves to level 4 and becomes what I term a compassionate human being, the monad now has subjective consciousness at the causal level. This allows it to be in communication with intuitive and inspirational ideas. If you look carefully at some of the subjective labels, you see an asterisk. This indicates that the monad has objective consciousness when it is asleep on those planes. It is also objectively conscious when it has an out-of-body experience or when it dies and begins its transition back to its causal body to rest between incarnations. Of particular note is the fact that the young one soul is not subjectively conscious at all when it is asleep. A compassionate 4 soul is subjectively conscious on the mental plane. This is something that the younger souls are not able to achieve. We have talked about the 5 grades of soul development. The next question to ask is how many souls fall into each category presently? The answer is presented in the diagram. 85% of humanity currently occupies the lowest 2 development levels. These are young 1 souls and community 2 souls. Of the 2, the young 1 souls are supposed to be in the vast majority. They number 60% of humanity today. I personally feel this figure of 60% is too high. I am more comfortable with the general understanding that most of humanity are relatively recent to the human party, and therefore the games played are geared towards their evolutionary needs. Souls having reached level 3 are classified as cultured. They make up the majority of the remaining group of humanity. The 2 highest grades hardly figure at all, although most esoteric thinkers are sure they number amongst that grade. The reality is very different. The 4th column lists the number of incarnations an average monad takes to graduate to the next grade of consciousness. These numbers should be taken as a very rough guide. Lee Bladden, in his excellent book, The Science of Spirituality, suggests that it takes an average monad 70,000 incarnations to pass through the human kingdom. There is an esoteric saying that it takes 500 years to graduate from the fourth kingdom, where one day of that 500 years is equal to an incarnation. Calculate this out and it would take 182,500 incarnations. This number is based on the monad just going with the flow and making no particular effort to improve its lot. So, 70,000 is a feasible number, just as much as 200,000 is. What matters is the effort you put in to maximize the goal set in each incarnation. It is a privilege to be down here. You can't progress unless you come to school, and you can't come to school unless you have a birthing slot. Regardless of the fact that there are over 7.5 billion people incarnated at present, apparently there are a potential pool of 60 billion human monads that could qualify to take incarnation. Going back to the table, the youngest souls may have undergone 30,000 incarnations. Consequently, they have learnt a lot less about how to activate and control their envelopes of incarnation. This explains why so many of the planet's inhabitants are so fractious. They are focused in their physical and emotional bodies. They are run by their feelings and their desires, and their mental body has difficulty being heard. Going back to the number of 60 billion, let us assume that 20 billion of those are younger souls. Where are the 40 billion older ones, and why are they not down here helping to calm things down? The reason is that groups of monads incarnate together. They require a specific set of conditions to aid their evolution. If that environment is one of apparent chaos, then so be it. This is what is needed for them to experience all that is needed for them to grow in awareness. This happens slowly, very, very slowly. The last 12,000 years have been dominated by the repeated incarnations of the youngest monads. This is changing slowly, and a new wave of older souls are beginning to incarnate. They are picturesquely called the indigo children. These beings are linked to the emerging age of Aquarius. I am of the firm opinion that there is going to be no new age leap in consciousness, as many of my esoteric colleagues assume. What is going to change is the ratio of younger to older souls. When the bulk of souls are younger, the older souls see no value in incarnating. A few of them do, but their role is to help balance the negativity created by the younger souls. The negativity generated by the younger souls hampers the development of the older ones. For this reason, those greater beings that guide our evolution allow for different time slots for each group of monads to achieve their objectives. To be more precise, for the guardian angels of those monads to create environments and opportunities for their charges to learn and grow. So as stated, the ratio of younger to older souls is about to change to favor the older ones. What then happens to the younger souls? They sleep in their causal bodies until another cycle of activity is initiated that creates an environment that is conducive for their further evolution. It is apparent today, studying human demography, that environments that previously supported younger souls are no longer available. Over 50% of the planet is urbanizing. This by its very nature is moving these monads into a group relationship, which leads me to classify them as community-focused souls. Others have used the term civilized. This term has unfortunate undertones, and that is why I avoid it. However, Used in its correct context, when human groups form a civil society, they become civilized. It is also for this reason that I personally estimate that there must be a higher percentage of grade 2 human monads present on Earth at the moment. I discuss this further in the next presentation when I look at the 5 stages of soul development in detail. At the moment, you have 5 headings and a list of conditions attached to them presented in tables. I wish to flesh these out further so it is clearly understood what the monad is learning as it passes through each of these stages. Every stage is important and leads to a greater understanding of what it is to be human. If you wish to read a transcript of the presentation or leave a comment, links to my website are in the description box below. Thank you.